And you're trying to obviously make sure if people are going into a fasting session, they don't have extreme thyroid or autoimmune or massive adrenal issues. They're kind of going into with a place of metabolic stability before they're jumping into that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Any sort of sudden dietary change, and that's a really big thing I harp on in this book. Any sort of sudden dietary change, your body really has to adapt to. So your body wants a certain level of balance and homeostasis. And the more adrenally damaged you are, more adrenal dysfunction you have, the harder it is for you to adapt to any change. So if you haven't worked out, think about this example. If you haven't exercised and you go in and you do very long, intense workout with a trainer, you're going to be really sore for a few days, right? You're going to need a lot of
Exactly.
recovery. You wouldn't want to go back the next day and do the same workout. This is kind of the same thing with fasting or anything else. The best way to do is kind of lean into it, right? So I always tell people when it comes to fasting, start with a 12-hour overnight fast, hydrate your body well in the morning. Okay. And then once you get to that point, you feel good with that, you push it up to 13, 14 hours, right? So it's small, gradual steps. And if you notice at some point that your body's just not feeling great, back it down a little bit. Okay. So there's different strategies you can do with applying intermittent fasting. It's really the same thing with the ketogenic diet. I talk about it in the book. If you're eating 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, don't all of a sudden the next day go down to 20 grams of carbohydrates. Too much of a shock on the system. So you start gradually reducing. Okay. And I give a formula for how to do that in the book, where how you gradually reduce. And that's a gentle approach to keto adaptation that I find works for a lot of people. Okay. And
That's
so I think
great.
that's key.
That's great. Yeah, typically with patients that I recommend, and I don't really call it a keto, I just call it, I have a paleo template that's kind of my foundation. And then we go lower carb paleo, which is essentially going to be ketogenic. Once we go below 50 or 20 net carbs, that kind of gets those ketones up. And then there could be moderate, there can be autoimmune, there can be carnivore. Carnivore is essentially a default keto, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%
absolutely.
default.
Yep.
I find the big pitfalls with keto, just with people already having metabolic disturbances, is number one, poor digestion. There's just
Yes.
biliary insufficiency, not enough enzymes, not enough acids. And then these foods have a really tough time being digested. What's your experience with that?
Oh, that's huge. In fact, in the book, I talk about how, working with people with a ketogenic diet over the years, I found that if I have 3 people, I put them on, in general, roughly around 60% of the population will respond favorably to a ketogenic diet. But then you've got that other 30 to 40% that just really, really struggles. And oftentimes it's due to the fact that they're not getting good bile release, poor stomach acid, poor bile release. And those things need to be addressed. I talk in detail about that in the book. I go through a lot of strategies to help improve stomach acid, improve bile. I know you talk a lot about that in this show, things like doing apple cider vinegar and water, drinking ginger tea throughout the day. I talk about some of the top herbs, things like dandelion, radishes. I eat radishes almost every single day, cucumbers, celery, really good for helping improve bile flow, thinning out the bile, improving bile flow. You got things like artichoke, another really, really good one for that. So adding in some of these great foods, artichokes, dandelions, arugula, things like that into your diet will help thin that bile and help improve the bile flow. And yeah, a lot of people have bile stones, so gallstones in their gallbladder. And a lot of people don't have their gallbladder. And if you've had your gallbladder taken out, it's almost a guarantee that your liver, the bile ducts in your liver, because your liver is what actually produces bile. Gallbladder is just a storage component for it.
Yep.
But the bile ducts in your liver are most likely jammed up. So you're getting very poor bile flow. So you're struggling with being able to emulsify and digest those fats and get the fat soluble nutrients. You got to really flush those out. And there are different strategies for flushing them out. Okay. Different cleanses and things like that. And I even talk about one in the book. You can also do something as simple as taking activated charcoal roughly about 30 minutes to an hour before you eat a meal. Okay. Consuming a good, good quality meal and including some of those vegetables I talked about, artichokes, radishes, arugula, things like that to help thin the bile flow. And then also taking some supplements like dandelion, bile salts like choline, things like that, that can really help with pushing out more bile and clearing those bile stones. So I actually have a gallbladder, or it's called a bile flush protocol in the book that utilizes charcoal, because charcoal is a great binder for the gut, and it will bind bad bile and bile stones and help pull that stuff out of the system.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of toxins in the bile. So it makes sense if
Yes.
your bile is being released into the small intestine, if there's a whole bunch of charcoal there, it'll kind of bind up a
Yep.
lot of the not so nice critters, right? The not so nice
Yep.
stuff in there. Yeah, totally makes
Absolutely.
sense.